My heart was racing with nervousness and hope as I prepared to go down the aisle with my lace veil in place and my bouquet in hand when someone knocked on the door. A soft, wary rap on the door, not from the wedding coordinator, and certainly not from my maid of honor. A security guard was it. He leaned in, voice quiet, but eager, and half opened the door to the wedding room. At the back service gate, we have just apprehended a young woman, Miss Miller. It corresponds to the image you provided. That's your sibling, the town of Madison. I went completely still. A change occurred in the air. My entire arms sprang up. He went on to say, she was all by herself, but she was carrying a big canvas bag, and inside it, we discovered a gallon of red paint, remain sealed. Industrial grade. I felt sick to my stomach. My voice became parched. I was gasping for air. Can you paint? I had her ruin my wedding. That garment, those lovely blossoms, the passageway, you name it. Jacob and I had spent the better part of 2 years creating this. Every single thing I had planned, fought for, and suffered for. Just when it was about to be destroyed, she arrived. And what's even worse, it didn't even shock me. Madison has attempted to undermine me before. I stood alone for the second time in a row, while my own family rallied around her. It was the absolute worst. For a split second, I just stared at the guard. The air was heavy with the aroma of gardenias and hairspray. The moment I gave my bouquet to my closest friend Isabel, my hands trembled ever so little. Do you have any plans, ma'am? The guard stood calmly yet firmly and inquired. We should immediately press charges, contact the sheriff. Her handcuffed and led out into public view were the mental pictures that kept popping into my head. But no, today is not the day, not today. Show her the ropes. Permanently, I said, my voice as frigid as ice, and make sure the guest list is accurate. Also, please do not let my parents out if they are in the area. With a nod, the guard departed. Subduedness returned. Isabel leaned in my direction at a snail's pace, her speech barely audible. Lauren, are you all right? I stared at her, and then I glanced in the mirror at myself. My veil is a little bit crooked. I love my lipstick. My eyes, though, were exhausted. I drew in a long breath and straightened my spine. Put an end to jogging. I will no longer apologize. This time has come about because the events of the weeks leading up to this day. There was more to it than that. Conflict ensued. Plus this wedding, the gown, the arch, and the groom who will meet me at the altar. I won this battle. Just 2 months ago, it seemed like absolutely ideal. In the heart of Maple Falls at the Willoughby Garden Hall, Jacob and I stood beneath strings of golden lights. Soft eucalyptus and citrus aromas wafted across the room as the sound of delicate wine glass clinking echoed. As planned, our engagement party was a low-key affair that exuded elegance. When I turned to look at him, he smiled at me with that unwavering confidence, the one that gave me the unshakable sense that no matter what happened, we would be the only ones left standing. No other place had I ever felt so watched over, so protected. Jacob Reed was more than a lover to me. He was a rock during all my storms. When he started working as an architect at the same business where I was an interior designer, 5 years ago we crossed paths. Nice, quiet, and smart. Instead of talking over me, he inquired about my views. Our connection was immediate and strong. It seemed like the future was finally coming up to us tonight, with all the people we loved in one location. Until I glanced across the room, that is. They were right there, sitting awkwardly at a table near the front. My parents, Susan and Greg Miller, smiled as if they had practiced it in the vehicle. Madison, my younger sister, was casually browsing through her phone next to them. Public figure, persistently harmed, ruler of mayhem. It appeared as though she would want to be somewhere else. Because of our long history of animosity, we had never been close. However, a ceasefire was intended for tonight, only for a short while. Thus I grinned. She rolled her eyes at the toasts to Jacob and me, but I pretended I hadn't seen. My back was tenderly caressed by Jacob's hand. "Don't be concerned," he murmured. "I can see them now. At least that's an accomplishment. Truly, I wished that were true." Following that, it was Susan who got to her feet. Using a spoon, she clinked her glass. Suddenly, the room fell silent, as if the laws of gravity had changed. "Is it possible for me to speak for a moment, please?" The speaker's voice exuded an air of refined sophistication as she spoke. Rather than hot, I felt sick to my stomach. Lauren, my lovely daughter, and Jacob, her amazing fiancé, have my heartfelt congratulations. We couldn't be prouder of them. Then came the respectful applause. Hung up the glasses. Jacob gave me a firm squeeze. I beamed with gratitude. At that point, though, Susan continued speaking. She adopted a more pleasant tone, less warm. "And there is something else I need to tell you." She dropped her glass. "After much deliberation and some difficult discussions, Greg and I have come to the conclusion that Madison deserves the $50,000 wedding fund that was originally designated for Lauren." It seemed as if time stood still in the room. I moaned. As I waited for the punchline, I couldn't help but laugh softly and uncertainly. But that wasn't the case. My throat convulsed with laughter. I peered around, hoping that someone would come over and join in. Laugh along with me. It was meant to be humorous. However, nobody did. Looks changed. Shock ensued. Jacob clenched his fist around mice. "That's funny, Mom," I said, my laughter hardly contained. "Are you kidding me? It is all mine. I received it from you many years ago." Susan's grin faded, as if a mask were being removed. Her chin was up. "Lauren, I'm not joking," she declared with an incisive tone. "It's more important for Madison, who is getting married later this year, than it is for you." I felt my chest pound with anguish. "You can't be serious," I muttered. Yet she was. Adjacent to her with his arms crossed, my dad sat expressionless. Complete silence. There is absolutely none backing. Step by step, my chair slid back behind me, and I rose to my feet. Every cent of that sum has been in my name since the age of 19. It's a custodial account. You two explicitly said that it was for my use. Like the legislation was just a suggestion. Susan shrugged. "Jacob and you both have solid careers. Ryan and Madison are having a hard time. Furthermore, they are deserving of a stunning wedding." Breathing seemed impossible. Surrounding the anger was a sense of astonishment, a profound and sharp startle. I mentioned that we had already made deposits. Our budget was meticulous. With some of it, we intended to put down the mortgage on our first house. Madison abruptly got out of her chair and got to her feet. "Lauren, you could have offered to share it months ago. You know we need it more than you." She yelled out, "Oh my God, stop being so selfish." I clenched my teeth and gently shifted my attention to her. "Listen, Madison, this has nothing to do with need. It's all about respect. I put some thought into this. I saved up. You wasted all your money on a phony venture, and now you want me to pay for it." The sharpness of Susan's voice was like a whip. Her fiancé is trying his hardest, but she lives a simple life. You've always had more, Lauren. Crossing my arms across my chest, I drew near. And here I am being penalized for something I did not do. Work for it, follow the rules, play smart. Total absence of sound. A flush spread across Susan's cheeks. and I saw an intensity in her eyes that had been absent for a long time. Afterwards, suddenly, she came up and gave me a slap. Hard. The sound of the crack resounded like a gunshot in the room. My cranium swiveled to one side. A sudden flush of heat raced across my face, stinging my cheek. It wasn't the agony, though. A betrayal had occurred. The collective gasp from the audience was both strong and audible. A glass broke on the floor. I stood there paralyzed with rage, rather than tears welling up in my eyes. With a steady, icy voice, I turned around to confront her again. "I told you no, therefore you can't hit me." Near the bar, I could make out a voice at the room's perimeter. "Excuse me, but I have to report an assault occurred at Willoughby Garden Hall right now." In a matter of minutes, alarms. No one spoke during the gathering. Nobody budged. Just 2 cops showed up at the location. One approached me. "Were you the sole victim of that blow?" One nod from me. A waitress came over and broke it all down for the customer. Unobstructed view. Scores of eyewitnesses. Susan made an effort to conceal it. "This is just family business. She's my daughter." Yet the cop remained composed. "Assault is assault," the woman said. He then looked over at me. "Are you considering filing charges?" My chest pounded, yet I managed to get my point across. The answer is yes. After 3 weeks after the slap that broke my engagement party, the arrest, the silence, and the aftermath, I began to believe that maybe everything had finally calmed down. Yeah, I was completely incorrect. Cloudy and peaceful, the morning of a Thursday arrived. Upon returning from work, I placed my bag on the counter and proceeded to open the mailbox. There was a huge, official-looking, foreboding envelope inside. "Holton Farrow Attorneys at Law" is the return address. Even before I opened it, I could feel it. I felt a knot in my gut and knew something awful was lurking within. It was torn open by me. There was an official notification inside. People were suing me because I was my parents' child. In a literal sense, no. From a legal standpoint, my parents, Greg and Susan Miller, were going to sue to get back the $50,000. What is their assertion? That the funds were set aside specifically for educational purposes and that I had used it inappropriately. My hands quivered as I fixated on the documents. I was gasping for air. Jacob came into our flat and saw me seated on the floor, encircled by legal paperwork, and simply looking. As I murmured, "They're really doing this. They're trying to take it back, all of it." In his usual composed manner, he knelt down by my side. A simple "we'll fight" was all he said. We executed it. I retained the services of Claire Benton, an incisive, no-nonsense lawyer known for her unwavering resolve in court. She had the demeanor of someone who has witnessed worse things than God-obsessed helicopter parents. She was tall, composed, and spoke with authority. Looking at me across her desk, she finally remarked, after going over everything, bank records, account history, the arrest report, "Their case is without merit. The account was transferred to your name upon your 19th birthday. There are no limitations. Any assurances given orally will not be acknowledged in a court of law." Nodding, I felt relieved but also unsettled. "Then why bother?" I inquired. Unfazed, she continued, "Because individuals who are fond of your parents would prefer to destroy everything in their path than confess to favoring the wrong child." A freight train ran through me as I read that line. Financial gain was always secondary. It all came down to the picture, that which is under control, resolving Madison's shortcomings by dismantling my foundation. The court dates began to pile up. Depositions were conducted. The process of discovery, emails, It was like getting another wound every time I stepped foot in that courtroom and watched Greg and Susan sitting stone-faced next to Madison, avoiding eye contact with me. Their goal was more complex than only recovering funds. Their goal was to alter the course of events. Madison was called upon to testify during one dramatic hearing. She addressed the judge head-on and stated, Lauren was aware that the funds were intended solely for college. Up slowly, Claire stood. Ms. Miller, did you utilize your fund exclusively for college expenses? Madison paused. A small portion of it, she whispered. Unfazed, Claire continued. Actually, you left after 2 years and used that time to launch a yoga brand that didn't work, did you? There was a movement in the room. With a little lean, the judge stepped forward. That doesn't matter, Madison said, her voice becoming raised. Claire advanced a step. You weren't held to that standard if the funds were restricted. Why weren't you actually? It's very relevant. Total absence of sound. Madison clenched her jaw and blinked. No response. Sitting in that trial, I felt like a defendant in a conflict I had nothing to do with starting rather than a daughter. And at that same second, it hit me. A lawsuit was only one part of this. I was finally broken, and that was the last straw. Plus, I was not about to concede defeat. As I began to perceive the courtroom as the primary arena of conflict, an unexpected new front suddenly appeared. It all began when my cousin Rachel called. With a measured, thoughtful tone, she spoke. Hey, Lauren, I simply wanted to express, I'm really sorry about what happened between you and Jacob. My pulse plummeted. What about us? I said, my expression revealing my disapproval. I thought you two broke up. No, I answered in a stern tone. And who told you that? After a little pause then, last week your mom called. She accused Jacob of infidelity. She also mentioned that you canceled the wedding. Everything in the room whirled about. No, absolutely not. You're absolutely wrong. 3 further calls popped into my inbox within the hour. Anyone from long-lost cousins to a former college roommate. Many were perplexed and wanted to know why the wedding had been called off. Some people even went so far as to forward me emails that were obviously not from me. Consistent voice, same name. However, the address that was used to send the message was incorrect. Yes, it was a copy. Somebody had made an email account in my name and was sending out cancellation notices, all while condemning Jacob for being unfaithful and other accusations. Without hesitation, I identified the perpetrator. At least not at this time. However, I was aware before. Hello, Madison. Her fingerprints were visible everywhere. Facts with a twist, destroying the faith of individuals. Weaponizing perception. Everything was relayed to Jacob upon his return from a site visit. His expression was devoid of astonishment. With his jaw clenched, he remarked, "She sent me pictures." He added, "She contacted me too." I said, "What kind of pictures?" anticipating the response with a hint of dread. His phone was retrieved by him. A number of unrefined photos lay before us. Photoshop slap a man I'd never met, standing next to my awkwardly superimposed face. In an unidentified pub on a pretended evening out. Laughable, really, but it wasn't. Why? Because my parents also caught a glimpse of them. Madison had forwarded the identical phony images to them. That was her plan all along, a treacherous seed. I was attempting to poison Jacob's trust, which was my only remaining asset. He made eye contact with me. Not for a second did I believe a word of it. My hands were shaking and my stomach hurt. What they were doing was secondary to its significance. They would go to any lengths to damage my reputation in order to obtain power. One of the few relatives who hadn't taken a side was my Aunt Margot, Susan's sister, and I contacted her. On the second ring, she responded. "I've been meaning to give you a call," she murmured regretfully. "What is going on?" I said, my voice quivering. She hesitated. Gently, she said, "Your mom is trying to make you look unstable, so no one questions where the money went." This was her way of explaining why her mother was shielding Madison, even though Madison never deserved it. A chill ran down my spine when I felt it. The smack wasn't light, an action in court. Someone was trying to slander someone. An all-out strategic plot to destroy all I had worked so hard to create. In order to discredit me, in order to ruin my future. So Madison could get away with it. As a chill of wrath settled into my chest, I leaned against the kitchen counter. They were no longer attempting to break me for no reason. They intended for no one to believe me. In the event that I resisted, I, however, would not shatter. And I certainly wasn't going anywhere. It was nearly midnight when it arrived. My phone buzzed as I was wide awake in bed, next to Jacob going through yet another round of damage control, replying to guests, clarifying rumors and screenshotting proof. Just a number that I hadn't seen in a long time. No name provided. A message as well. I was also victimized by this. Something skipped a beat in my chest. For what seemed like an eternity, I just gazed at it, terrified to even hope that it meant what I assumed it meant. A second communication arrived thereafter. "If you happen to have this number on you, it's Alex. I apologize for leaving you alone with them. Hello, Alex. My sibling. I lost touch with this 4-year-old 6 years ago, following a very traumatic Thanksgiving meal that nobody ever brought up again. Our last communication was many days ago. Stay away from phone calls and messages. Has departed." My breath came up short as I straightened up in my seat. Again I typed, "They also did this to you." How can that be? Nearly immediately, a typing bubble emerged. Just the same, just a different flavor. When I was 17 years old, my mom tried to convince me that I didn't really need to send Madison my full college fund because I had a scholarship. She said it was my responsibility as an older sibling. I moaned, "Wait a second, I had no idea." "Indeed, it was not your place to do so." I confronted her following her theft of my funds intended for Madison's creative camp in New York. These funds were never reimbursed. I informed Dad that I had had enough of the family and then left without looking back. I kept my fingertips tethered to the display. "They lied and said you severed ties with us, but they never told me that. That was the original intent. Mom is in charge of the storyline, and Madison is merely following in her footsteps." Breathing seemed impossible in the midst of all that time and quiet. And now this. That was the last piece. The target wasn't just me. Next in line was I. This was nothing new for them. What they did was second nature to them. They used shame manipulation and the weaponization of familial relationships to put all the power and resources in Madison's hands. And when did anyone oppose? They vanished, similar to Alex. After that, I lay in the dark for what seemed like an eternity, with Jacob sound asleep next to me. Like static that I couldn't turn off, one idea kept circulating in my mind. Have I allowed them to distort the truth so many times? To what extent was my formative years orchestrated? Carefully selected, sculpted into forms that were logically correct. For Madison alone. For some reason, I kept thinking I was the only one in this mess. Actually, though, I wasn't. Knowing that in some way gave me strength. That night, Alex sent a brief final note. "Let them win no more. Get this done, Lauren." A screenshot was taken and saved, ensuring not merely stating the pattern. They believed they could conceal their legacy nevertheless. Claire was the one who discovered it. Tucked away in a stack of papers my folks had submitted years ago. Legal letters, account transfers, tax records. They had imagined I'd never lay eyes on them. Claire was meticulous, even obsessive, as we prepared for our last court appearance. She carefully studied a PDF titled MISC Financial Documents 2010-2012 while whispering, "This is interesting." Her pupils narrowed in concentration. "What?" I inquired, hunching over her desk. Then she passed the document to me. A contract was involved, with my name forged at the bottom. This document bears the signatures of Greg and Susan Miller. This $50,000 account was created as a financial agreement that said its sole purpose was for educational purposes and that any other usage would need parental authorization. Started dating at the age of 17. Remains a minor under the law. They still have control over it. That document, though, eluded me. I didn't sign it. Cleo gently raised her eyes to see my. "This is blatant fraud. I will object if they bring this up in court. However, we have the option to pursue further action if we so desire." I moaned. Did they really forge my name? With a nod, she gave her consent. And that renders this document invalid. On top of that, it provides us with leverage. We have the option to pursue a counterclaim, alleging fraud, falsifying documents, or even misrepresenting our identity. As I glanced at the signature, I couldn't help but notice how it was an uncanny mimic of my handwriting. As I murmured, "I don't want revenge," my voice barely audible. Then Claire arched an eyebrow. "Is that so?" My response was a nod. "I simply want them removed. I do not require that they be penalized." As she leaned back, her mind wandered. "Well, this gives us a way out. We demonstrate that we have the legal means to destroy them, but we are willing to refrain from doing so as long as they leave peacefully. We demand an end to all accusations, threats, and false emails or lawsuits. Either they surrender completely or we unleash nuclear war." It had been months since I had touched the pen in my hand. They had distorted the tale for a long time, painting me as the antagonist, the roadblock, and the ungrateful daughter. I now had evidence, though, with all of their deceit, regarding their design. They weren't squandering. It was rewritten, redefinition complete, changed form. Claire subtly informed the other side's lawyers that we had the fake document by drafting a notice of discovery inclusion. The calls came to a halt 3 days later. The court date has been postponed, and then they were let go. No justification. There is no need to apologize. No sound at all. However, it was not weaponized this time. There was no penalty. It was time to flee. Despite my knowledge that I would never get the justice I sought, it was better than what I had. Control. Moreover, I knew with full confidence that they would have no further influence over my destiny. It was a clear morning sky. As the sun dipped below the Maple Falls hills, it embraced the garden setting that Jacob and I had selected months prior. Rows of white seats, a wooden arch adorned with delicate peonies, and eucalyptus and string lights suspended between trees, simple, elegant, and perfectly us. Standing before a big mirror in the wedding room, I wore a flawlessly fitting dress and a veil. I took a deep breath and waited. She believed we had succeeded, but not to a profound degree. As our visitors began to arrive, Jacob patiently waited at the altar. There had been a thorough triple check of all details. It wasn't just the flowers and seating charts that we had taken care of. We had security guards. At both doors, there were 2 trained security personnel who had explicit orders. Absence of Madison. Sorry, Susan. Absolutely not Greg. We were being quite cautious. After that, a gentle tap on the door. A security officer entered the room. With great caution and modesty, he said to Miss Miller, "We have recently apprehended a woman attempting to enter through the back gate. She corresponds to the photo you supplied." My jaw clenched. Was she by herself? Indeed. However, her possession of a sizable tote bag was a red paint can the size of a gallon that we discovered during our search. The hands of time froze. It belonged to her. In fact, she intended to carry it out. Destroy the garment, desolate the aisle, destroy the present, rebuilding everything from the ground up with Jacob and me. All she wanted to do was set it on fire. While I waited, the guard kept an eye on me. You have the last say. We can contact the sheriff, repress charges. Then I lowered my gaze to my bouquet. Corset of ivory with white flowers. Not once did my fingers quiver. No, his brow arched slightly. Just take her away from the property and make sure she doesn't return. While she's gone, survey the area around my parents' house. If they happen to be here, treat them the same way. With that, he departed. In the stillness, I felt a surge of emotion that had eluded me for months. Calm down. No, it wasn't because no detail was overlooked. Simply put, I had had enough of timidity. With wide eyes, Isabel entered. So what transpired? I kept my composure. A can of paint was an attempt by Madison to sneak in. Astonishment sunk in. Who she saying? Her goal was to ruin it all. I raised my eyes to meet hers. She didn't, though. Isabel drew back her eyes and grinned. Then you've won already. Outside, my uncle, the sibling of my dad, was ready to accompany me as I made my way down the aisle. He extended a helping hand. Am I prepared? My response was a nod. Openings appeared at the doors, and as soon as I entered the garden, all other concerns faded away. The treacheries, the fights in court, the sobs, the emptiness, it all just disappeared. Reason being, Jacob was present. As if we were untouchable, we stood beneath that arch and locked eyes with me. We spoke our vows under a blue sky. We swore to one another that we would defend each other with all our might, honor, and love. And when the celebrant announced, "You are welcome to kiss the bride," that's a mashicane. Applause wasn't only a sign of delight, it felt good. Despite the storm, the noise, and everything else they hurled at us, we managed to make it. There was no magic during the reception. Gentle tunes, glasses clinking, unforced laughter. I felt like I had earned every speech and toast. Nothing out of the ordinary. Those who loved us and loved us deeply. And as the night wore on and the music faded to its last chord, I glanced around and realized their attempt was unsuccessful. They were powerless against me. I was unable to free Jacob. This is not the time to poison. I left my own wedding not only as a wife, but as a whole new person. But now that I've experienced true freedom, I can say that. We vanished for 3 weeks after the wedding, Jacob and I. No emails, no phone calls, the sea alone. We went on a beach vacation to Oregon, where we slept in a little home, listened to gulls, as we got up and danced to 90s music as we cooked. It had been what seemed like an eternity since my body had forgotten how to brace itself for contact. No subpoenas were served. Keep quiet. There should be no unexpected calls from whitelisted numbers. No sound at all. I was even more receptive this time. Our new property is a little condo with 2 bedrooms located just outside of town, and we moved in as soon as we returned home. It was ours and it wasn't fancy. The remainder of the $50,000 served as the basis for our initial investment. We did our own wall painting. The living room is sage green and the kitchen is burned clay. Along the corridor hung framed wedding photographs. It was more than a house. It served as proof that we were alive and well, that victory was ours, with an intensity that was uniquely his. Jacob would spend his weekends putting together furniture. Like planting something long-lasting, I painstakingly planned each corner. While constructing a guest room bookcase one Saturday, Jacob posed the question, "Who do you think will be our first overnight visitor?" I grinned, put the phone down. My mind wandered to the sensations it would evoke for an instant. Should circumstances be different? Apologize gently if Susan phoned. When Greg finally spoke out, it would be after much silence, assuming Madison reached adulthood. However, the picture disappeared almost as fast as it appeared, to which I replied, "Someone who actually cares," as I brushed the dust from the shelf. When I said it, I really meant it. For our first Thanksgiving as a couple, we had a candlelit dinner, had a good laugh despite burned buns and gravy that spilled since I made too much food. Missed calls, I am not sorry. I turned one recently. Down with the card. There is no message. And guess what? Compared to my expectations, the pain was minimal. Why? Because I always managed to recall them whenever I felt their absence. That smack, legal action, the falsehoods, the fake agreement, the painting, the pictures. Countless methods were used to diminish my size. Easy to forget, easily supplanted. Plus, I ceased the act of waiting. I ran across Rachel again one day when I was supermarket shopping. After a deep embrace, she withdrew and whispered, "Wait a second, Madison's wedding is right as rain again." My eyebrow was arched. No, those days of us exchanging updates are long gone. An exhalation escaped her lips. The Grand Marquette Ballroom in downtown. A chef from Los Angeles is flying in. It's going to be massive. Your parents got a loan for it. I chuckled dryly. "Certainly," she said. "Would you go if they ask you?" she said softly. I met her gaze directly. With a can of paint, she attempted to derail my wedding. She blinked. "All right," she murmured softly. "I suppose that settles that." No one was ever invited. Perhaps that was the last action they took, in order to act as if I had vanished. However, what's hilarious is their tale no longer required my presence. I was penning my own because of it. As for their websites, over time they faded. Eventually, I got a message from my Aunt Margot. It appears that a number of relatives turned down Madison's wedding invitation. A few were courteous, some were direct. No interest in supporting people who torched their own daughter. Allegedly, said one relative, the luster had begun to fade. Those who had before nodded, subdued themselves, began to murmur, even if I didn't take pleasure in their shame. A different sensation washed over me. Happiness returned. This is not due to the fact that they were defeated. I stopped caring whether they won, though, and there in the void between my former desires and the alternatives I ultimately selected, peace was mine. After a storm that seemed like it would never stop, there's a peculiar quiet. That is not a lack of sound, but to be clear, gradually it takes hold. Suddenly you feel relief. Your jaw isn't clamped. You chuckle without acknowledging anyone's presence. Your reaction when the phone rings is unflappable. To be free is to hear that stillness. Family meant the world to me when I was younger. Blood was more important than truth. That love required me to gulp down suffering, forgive without end, and remain humble so that others may experience greatness. Though I was mistaken, true relatives aren't those who share your surname. When all else fails, it's them that turn up. It is this person who, despite the inconvenience, safeguards your tranquility. What about love? Respect is the essence of love. Modesty. Masquerading as love, obedience with more aesthetic appeal, is really just love without limits. For a long time, I convinced myself that I could improve my situation by simply working more, being kinder, and saying less. It would show in how they treated me. However, my actions were never the main focus. It revolved around my persona duty of care, value of self. They were reluctant to gaze into the mirror. Consequently, the mirror was shattered, again and again. That is until I stopped giving them the reins. I was able to defend myself when I indicated accusations. Rodeo in court again, defended my reputation, protected my nuptials. I was only expressing myself. By no means was I being cruel. I was asserting my entitlement to something that nobody had ever taught me: human deference. Obviously, the funding was helpful. Our house was purchased, designed our lives, launched the course of our destiny. However, the true benefit of that $50,000 was not monetary in nature. Symbolic, yes. The reason being that they attempted to seize it from me in order to benefit Madison. The objective is to remove my existence. I declined as well. I was unyielding, not to be spiteful, yet for the sake of my dignity. The single most crucial thing I picked up from the experience was nobody has the right to disturb your tranquility. Even your mom doesn't. Ditto for your sister. Your parents and guardians did not. Whoever you choose to seat at your table is your choice. Tell me who gets a cut of your winnings. The one who gains your confidence. If the family you were born into isn't going to evolve with you, you get to reinvent its meaning. Looking about me today, I can see a life that I created. An unfaltering spouse. There were friends who turned up. A long-lost sibling who emerged from hiding to reassure me I had company. Above anything else, there is still me, wiser, more powerful, whole. Simply said, when I stopped wasting time and energy attempting to win over those who didn't value me. When I got free, that was it. After a year, the sound has disappeared. Disputes avoided. There are no dangers. Avoid sending out phishing emails at odd hours. No chaos, just the steady beat of a life we created together, Jacob and I. Reed and Miller Interiors was our little design studio that we co-founded. We own it, and it's not showy either. Every time we take on a new project or assist a couple, it's as if we're fighting for a new beginning for them. From time to time, Jacob will inquire, "Do you believe your parents will ever contact you?" I respond in the same manner every time. Possibly, but an apology won't be enough if they do. Something has to give. I am not anticipating anything soon. I am no longer willing to wait. Here I am fully alive, with a love that makes me soar. My work brings me fulfillment. I achieved inner tranquility that no one else could have bestowed to me. I didn't only manage to evade their treachery. I transformed it into a starting point.